program might contain strong language. If you think you may be offended, switch off now.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Watch Mojo. I am your host, Rob, and with me today is our CEO and co-founder, Ashkan Karbas-Fushan. How's it going today, Ash?
I'm pretty good. We kind of took a sabbatical from the podcast series, and who knew this would be the topic that would bring us out of retirement?
Well, yes, we were looking for some catalysts to get this going again. And for context, anybody who has followed along, Inside Mojo was a series that we did earlier this year where we looked at the history of YouTube and Watch Mojo as they kind of went hand in hand with each other. And once we wrapped that up, we took a bit of a break. But the new extension of this series going forward will be to take a look at a different theme every week, basically, or for every episode. And so this time we thought it would be a good idea to do Inside America in light of the Charlie Kirk assassination that happened last week. Jimmy Kimmel recently getting suspended from his show. A lot of fallout happening following those events. So we're going to weigh in on it. And let's start off by just talking about some of the content that we've done recently about America on Watch Mojo, which has had an interesting response from our audience, wouldn't you say? Particularly a video on 10 ways America is in decline right now, which I think kind of aligns with some of what we're seeing in the news.
Yeah, so I mean, I think last year I was actually researching like ancient history and empires and dynasties, and I came across this really interesting stat, which was, you hear of like the Greek Empire, the Achaemenid Persian Empire, the Roman Empire, and many different empires, and you think they lasted millennia or at least hundreds of centuries. But on average, an empire lasts 250 years. And it just so happens that 2026 will mark America's 250th year anniversary. And so, if you take a look at what's happened in America, when I did the Fox and the Hen House documentary in 2018 or 2019, one of the themes was, why are so many younger Americans drawn to socialism, for a country that's synonymous with capitalism? And I think when you look at like the debt, the deficit, the gap widening between, the rich and the, mainstream America, plus the education and health system, the militarization of police, and, how America's become more isolationist, you could make the argument that, if not next year, that America's kind of golden era as the leading empire will be usurped by China. That's kind of accepted. I don't think that's a shocking statement anymore in 2025. But yeah, I mean, we could start off talking a little bit about this week, but I mean, last week, Charlie Kirk got assassinated. This week, Jimmy Kimmel got canceled, and this came after Colbert got canceled. So we could go deeper, but I mean, look, I think some of it is just reading the room. I'm not defending it or justifying ABC's decision, which is fascinating on so many levels, which we'll get to later. But I mean, I'm old enough to remember when Bill Maher was canceled right after 9/11 for saying that the hijackers, the Islamic fundamentalist terrorist hijackers, were not cowards. He went to add, we, the American military are the cowards for lobbing bombs from far off places, which frankly was not even that shocking. But the key was context. It was the mood. America had just been attacked. Pearl Harbor was a military, conflict, if we're going to be fair. So America in 2011 had just been attacked. And for Bill Maher, who was the host of Politically Incorrect, to come out and say that, America just didn't care for it, and it was like a domino effect. And, again, I also remember at a time when the Republicans were the so-called violent, crazy people. If you think of Timothy McVeigh, who bombed who did the terrorist attack, domestic terrorist in Oklahoma. And now you got the Republicans who supposedly can't take a joke, so it's like, America's in a very, very different place. And now we're talking about fascism. So.
Yeah. We'll get into all of this. Let's start by talking about Charlie Kirk in particular, because you've alluded to him being a potential candidate for Times Person of the Year, which I guess on the surface sounds like a very controversial thing. Like everything that happens in American news, the response has been extremely polarized. You have people kind of like building him up as a martyr, and other people on the opposite extreme saying, yeah, like he deserved what he got because of his comments about the Second Amendment and gun rights and things like that. So where do we stand on this?
Okay, so I mean, look, Charlie Kirk was neither the big bad person that his critics make him out to be, nor is he clearly this flawless individual, second coming of Jesus Christ, that now a lot of people are politicizing his death. And to be clear, nobody deserves to get killed for their thoughts, no matter how, not about him, in general, reprehensible one's
And
thoughts.
I've seen that a lot from even like very liberal people too, saying like nobody deserves to be killed, and like, you know, that's,
I mean, in any fashion, but I mean, his family was there. So,
yeah.
So my comment was just, it was on LinkedIn. It was just more of like a reflection of media. Adolf Hitler, whom a lot of people compared Donald Trump to, and I last year said that's not really a fair comparison, although I did write an article that we converted to a video that did pretty well, which was the parallels between Germany and in the 1930s and America in the 2020s. And those are fair, I feel. You know, Hitler had a putsch.
There's a lot, actually.
There's a lot. Hitler had his putsch. Trump had the insurrection. Hitler had the old man Hindenburg. Trump came after the old man Biden, although Trump ain't no spring chicken either. There was a lot of hyperinflation. Both countries had been coming out of wars. And I think that is a fair assessment. And I think the feedback to that was pretty fair. But so the key, though, is my takeaway is Time Magazine. It's a website, obviously. It's a digital media company as well. But I was more to say that, again, there are people in this new fragmented media landscape that build up their following, as Joe Rogan did, John Boy Media getting an investment from Major League Baseball, the WatchMojos. It was just to go Charlie Kirk, whether you agreed with him or not, had built up this kind of following and his personal brand. And to be fair, you know, America is arguably the greatest country in the history of, you know, history. Part of it is that debate. Part of it is the, you know, the stump, the going around and debating. And again, sound bites, he said, I understand why there was a lot of criticism about what he would say.
Yeah. Especially when taken out of context too.
Well, that's what I'm saying. But when you hear that, and I mean, this is the thing, right? Like, I mean, I've always been very neutral. I think WatchMojo, we like to be objective. We like to be impartial. But clearly, the second you rank something, you are being biased. I do recognize that. But my commentary was just, again, that, you know, the world of media has changed, and it's going to put Time in a predicament because they chose Hitler. They chose Khomeini, being born in Iran. I mean, I don't think Khomeini or Hitler had net positive influences, you know, to put it mildly.
Right.
So my comment was more, you know, if Time, you know, somebody was basically saying people will forget about this. And I said, I'm not so sure. I do think that America, like everything else, goes to an extreme, you know, the same way that like Clinton was the opposite of Papa Bush, W was the opposite of Clinton, Obama the opposite of Bush, Trump the opposite of Obama. There's always this kind of like
pendulum effect.
Pendulum. And before there's balance and a regression to the mean, things go to the extreme. So just like 10 years ago, I think things like DEI, Black Lives Matters, were well-intentioned. There was a reason these movements started, right? But like anything else, they get hijacked. They get, you know, they get taken to the extreme. And then there's pushback. So I do think that the Charlie Kirk assassination is going to be a watershed event. And Time is kind of like their hands are tied. If they, I mean, who else this year would be the person of the year? They're not going to go with a Trump again. They're not going to go with an Elon. So they also need like a fresh face. And my observation was just that, you know, I could see Time going with him because it is a defining moment in America where, you know, and it's like, I understand people are like freedom of speech, people making fun of him, and you should never make fun of people losing their life. But I'm like, look, it's like, if you're a corporation, if you're an academic organization, and you have an individual saying this was great, he deserved it, well then, aside from that being morally like horrible,
reprehensible,
reprehensible, you're putting a bullseye on everybody's target. Everybody becomes a target. Your back all of a sudden is is fair game. So I understand also why people have to come down hard. Now, whether or not Disney did the right thing with Kimmel or CBS did the right thing with Colbert, yeah, I think that is a bit different. I think, is it censorship? It's not, I don't necessarily think it's censorship from the companies. I think the companies, have a responsibility to many stakeholders. And with all due respect to Kimmel and Colbert, they're not the top stakeholder here.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it's their shareholders, but it's the collective of employees they have and ecosystem that they have. And as much as I hate to admit it, you could make the case that that kind of like divisive, sentiment that alienates half of America is probably not welcome. Now, what is a bit, you could make the argument about censorship is, yes, Donald Trump weaponizing the FCC, weaponizing institutions of government to say, hey, if you say things that I don't like, we're going to come after you. And if you wanted to merge with some company, we'll block it. There is beyond an ethical and moral question, and that is where you're sliding into fascism. And my article was, is America entering fascism? The main comment was entering, like, wake up. We've been in this state now for a few years.
Do you think that Trump's response is a reaction to also him being deplatformed, from like kicked off of social media and stuff like that? It's kind of happened to him. Like, this isn't unprecedented that somebody is being silenced like that,
It's a great point you make, Rob. I think some of it is, hey, if this happened to me, why can't it happen to others? But it is above and beyond that, right? I mean, I think, again, Trump, he is not this kind of leader that goes and plans and talks to people. He is a fly off the seat of your pants kind of guy. So I don't think there was that much planning or plotting. I think you've seen, Skydance and Paramount merged. And, oh, look, we're going to sacrifice CBS as part of that empire. It's like, oh, look, we're going to sacrifice Colbert to to Trump so he doesn't kind of block this merger. You look at many other times, he's suing New York Times now for $15 billion. So I don't necessarily think, even though Trump does always project this sense of like injustice is done to me, the Russia hoax, and some of it he's right? Like if in the end it was nothing involving him with regards to collusion with Russia, I would also be pretty peed off. And it's crazy. Donald Trump, president of America, there was like 2 assassination attempts, one that came close, forgotten. But I do think this is more just what we all anticipated. Somebody who's thin-skinned, very, very narcissistic, and does have these personal vendettas. He'll still go off on people, even you would think, he's won re-election. But I think when you're in your second term, and I don't think, by the way, that America is doomed or anything like that, because there are still these safeguards. So presuming he leaves in 2028, I guess, what the long-term impact on America is going to be is TBD. But there was an article in The Guardian that said America has 400 days to save democracy, because if at the interim elections there's not a sense of balance, it's clear that the Republicans are not going to get in his way the way some of them did in his first term. He does pretty much have like free reign to do what he wants. So that is a bit alarming. Again, I've always said it, in the West, y'all take your liberties and freedom for granted. I think this is what you are seeing in the West. Like last week in the UK, there was like the March for England or whatever. What is leading a lot of these countries now to wake up and push back? It's because clearly what they thought was the safe haven for their society, none of that should be taken for granted. The dangers and the specter facing France and UK, very different to the ones that the U.S. is facing. Well, I would say the U.S. is even more complicated, frankly, given how powerful it is on the global military and economic sense.
Yeah, even people like Tucker Carlson have been outspoken against, the basically preserving the right of free speech and being critical of this move to I guess suspend Kimmel, even though they don't align, in terms of like political views and stuff like that. So I think most people can agree that free speech is important, and that, nobody should be deplatformed, I don't think, for things that they say, but there probably are other reasons too. Like Trump has said, I know this is kind of sounds like a lame excuse, but it's like, oh yeah, the ratings were down. They were just waiting for an excuse to like get rid of this guy. Is there anything to that too? Because we know that also the late night shows are very, they only cater to the left leaning audience, right? They do, and they have alienated the other side of the country.
No, spot on and great point. Look, this is not going to be like politically correct, and a lot of people. I'm not talking about WatchMojo. We have like 50 employees. I'm not talking about our little, hub away from reality. For the last 10 years, corporations, even if they were open to the DEI, BLM, social justice kind of movements, they probably felt like it had gone too far. When you see a bunch of Microsoft employees storming into some VP's office and saying, we don't like, for example, that some Microsoft product is used by Israel to do this and that, that VP is like, wants to kill those people. That VP is like, I got my own goals. Do you think I control whether Microsoft products are used by Israel or not? As an example. But all of a sudden, the same way that academia had become this kind of like nonsense zone where you're doing everything but studying, and corporations had also become this thing that was like, keep it at home. It's like if we had a creative meeting to discuss any topic and it went sideways, after a while, I would also be like, guys, like, this isn't productive. Like, I respect everybody's point of view, but it's got to stop. So what am I getting at? Yes, corporations and academic institutions, I assure you, they are going to use this to clean house. Not saying that those individuals are problematic, but if they see somebody, an individual who's always militant, always complaining about everything, sense of indignation, yes, they're going to use this opportunity the way you had McCarthyism in the 20th century. They're going to use this opportunity to clean house. So you know what? We see the writing on the wall. The late night shows, nobody watches them the way they used to. And in fact, they themselves, we've talked about this, program for social now. They come up with these little segments that are like perfect for the YouTube platform. Yeah. So the concept of paying a host $50 million and then having 200 people run around to support that one person, that one narcissist's worldview, it's not really sustainable, because those media companies have to cut so many costs, less viewership, less ad dollars, less cable subscriptions. So, you know what I mean? Like corporations a decade ago, and I don't blame Disney then or now. They have, they got stakeholders in their ear. A decade ago, Disney went too far where, Snow White was not like what she looked like 50 years ago. And, you look at the memes with Netflix where all of a sudden, Cleopatra is an Asian woman, just like purely not being provocative, but almost trolling, people's like, am I on crazy pills? That same company now felt that, what Kimmel said crossed the line. Now, Kimmel didn't say anything. I think there were some articles where it was just, we don't really care what he said. It wasn't that bad. He didn't cross any line. But if Trump is going to kind of like just use this as an excuse to hurt us and other things we're doing, well, they're going to use the opportunity to clean house. I personally, I don't mind. Like I listen to a lot of people online. I'll talk to people, even if they're wrong, because it's informative. And when my team, let's say the idealistic, inexperienced, green, naive people would say things that I was like, this makes no sense. Like this person doesn't even have any experience. They don't even have any education. They don't even know what they're talking about. But I still engage in this and that. But I will admit, if I had trouble employees that were constantly whining and complaining, well, between the specter of AI, between the specter of automation, between like if you're Starbucks, and somebody orders a drink and you think this is the right canvas to make a political message on their name, you should get your ass fired. You should never be hired again. If you then go out there and you say, I criticize Starbucks, that's your right. No retaliation there. But if you're like, this is bullshit, Charlie Kirk was this, and it's totally fair, well then, guess what? Somebody's going to come and put a bullet in, Shelley's, the employee, your colleague Shelley's neck. Starbucks doesn't want that. So Starbucks has to come hard. Now, if people go, this is fascism. No, it's not really fascism. It's Starbucks has to protect its employees, right? It has to create us. So I think this again shows just the lack of common sense that, you know, I always say the youth is right. They were right about civil rights movement. The youth were right about LGBT rights. The youth were right about everything. Like they get some things wrong, but the youth generally, I mean, I'm 47. There's in some ways I'm a kid at heart, but there are times when I go, well, Ash, this is you just getting older, maybe a bit more successful. Like, don't lose your principle of like injustice is usually identified by younger, you know, less established people. But that went way too far. And so I think what you're seeing is, again, lack of education, helicopter parenting, social media, kids being in a pandemic, no socialization. You know, also like, hey, man, if I said some nonsense, my dad would tell me, you know, slap me across the face, and my mom would hurl her sandal at me. Yeah, that kind of fear. I'm not talking about child abuse, but that kind of fear is lacking now. So when you're in a class and some kid goes, I'm a cat, and the teacher has to go along with it, it's problematic. But what made it worse was that the teacher believed that you were a cat, you know? So,
Yeah.
so yes.
I had a university professor who said, who gave a very, very similar example to that, and was on the side of, yeah, if your child, if your kindergartner wants to be a lizard, let them be a lizard, you know?
Which is nonsense, right? Because if I go, I want to be Adolf Hitler, nobody's going to tolerate that. And I'm making an extreme scenario, but it's kind of like everything goes to an extreme. And even if I would have pointed these things out in 2017, 18, I would have had mutiny. People would have said I'm insensitive. I, at the time, was like, I get it. Let me understand. Like, you know, the examples I use, okay, if WatchMojo, even though we want to be objective, does like greatest TV dads of the 80s, and in the Me Too era, we made a decision to omit Bill Cosby. It's because we didn't want to be insensitive, right? We're like, we get it. But
it was like unfolding at the time.
It was unfolding. It would have been a big like endorsement of this guy being the royal a-hole of all time. But I think, though, at the end of the day, like we've said it, I'm sure old artists did a lot of things that, you know, at a given time are not fair. And so I just think, I mean, I don't want to use the word society as healing, because it's not. But society was definitely at a place that was neither sustainable nor, you know, there's a question, I think.
Is there a question?
Yeah, I believe, I don't know, do you see it? Should I read it?
I don't see it. Yeah.
The recent corporate ties and lawsuits by Trump influence these corporate decisions. Of course. Look, in a board meeting, you actually, I'll be honest with you, like most board a board is there to represent shareholders. And so most board level discussions, like employees, are never really up for consideration. They could give 2/3 of zero fucks, if we're going to be honest. I'm not talking about us, we're small. But like, I assure you, Citicorp is not sitting there thinking about employees. They'll spend talking about a lot of things, and a lot of it is regulatory. You know, what are the big macro level risks that we should be aware of? And so tariffs is one of them. But yes, equally, in fact, more important is if you have a president who is for sure going to lean on all these different tools that he has to force you to do something, which I don't support, by the way. That's not capitalism. Adam Smith, Wealth of Nations, invisible hand, he's turning around in his grave. This is not the way he envisioned capitalism to work. So it absolutely influences it. There are chilling effects. It is totally wrong. But the question is, what are you going to do about it, America? You know what I mean? Like, you got the mayor of Dearborn telling an American, you're not welcome here. The mayor of Dearborn happens to be Muslim. I mean, wake up, people, you know? So it's the same thing, right? Like, you know, we could talk about this a little bit, but like, we started the show talking about Bill Maher after 9/11. A week after that, like, Muslims, I'm born Muslim, but it's kind of like, I was like taken aback. The Muslims were like, we're going to build a mosque right next to World Trade Center. You know, like, if you're an American who just basically got attacked and these people were shouting Allahu Akbar and saying, you know, we're coming to avenge all the injustices that you big bad Christians have done in the name of crusades against our people, you would think that's when they're like, no, okay, this wasn't like an attack by Islam and we're not at war with Islam, although Islam is at war with you if you haven't figured it out. Like, Americans need to defend their liberties. Americans need to defend their freedoms and whatnot. Now, is Kimmel the hill to die on? No, nobody gives a damn about Kimmel. Even the people like Joe Rogan, I mean, maybe he'll come out today or tomorrow. Even all these people that for a decade built their names on censorship is bad. Do they want to risk getting in the crosshair of Donald Trump? You know what I mean? Like, even Fallon, he did a good intro. It was pretty funny.
Yeah, a lot of the late night hosts had a response that was kind of like,
but he was neutered. like what he did was really clever. It was more in the Fallon shtick style, but it was like clearly saying, okay, you could argue the humor speaks between the lines, but he kind of knows he's got to stay in line. Stewart kind of used a bit more sarcasm to make his point, but you still see that, America is changing, right? The same way that Donald Trump goes, we're going to take a 10% stake in Intel. It's kind of free money for the government. Yeah, that's not capitalism. I'm not saying it's Venezuela. I also don't want hyperbole. It's not North Korea, but it is sliding towards something that is not really America anymore. And telling a comedian, if you make a joke I don't like, you're going to get fired. It is a continuation of a trend that is not reassuring.
Yeah, we got another good question that pertains to WatchMojo, particularly as a media company. Help us understand the thought process between when, who, and how to cover these fast developing stories. Example, Luigi Mangione, Colbert, Kirk, Kimmel, etc.
Yeah, I mean, so I think you have to in media understand your lane like a bit, like they call it permission, brand authority. Like, yeah, if like I know more about history and current affairs than about like the latest MCU. That's why you guys are here, because I kind of saw that my knowledge of pop culture was quite expansive, but it wasn't what every fan of MCU or every fan of every franchise has. So I actually, I'll make it more pertinent. For us, I think our audience has evolved. Like if you started watching WatchMojo at 15 because you were into MCU a decade ago, today you also may care about current affairs. You may care about things like employment or war or whatever. Now, that doesn't mean we cover it hardcore in like a very factual, not factual, in a very not evergreen, the opposite, in a very timely, what is happening on the front lines. But I've tried to get the team, but also respecting sensitivities, and I don't want it to be like Ash's take. I'm like, hey, here's an interesting angle. Germany, America parallel. Or the average empire is 250. What happens next year? So for us, I think it's at a high level. Does this make sense for our audience, the general theme? If yes, then I admit it's what is the packaging?
Yeah.
If we come out there. Also, we don't want to be hypocrite charlatans. If we've never covered a Charlie Kirk, to come out and canonize him is not authentic, and to come out and vilify him is also a bit like misplaced. So we might do, I know you guys wanted to do reactions to it, and I know we're doing a few upcoming things about like, is America entering a fascist era? That's a working title.
That'll be a fun discussion.
That'll be a fun discussion. So for us, I think we do want to cover these things more, but we still want to put it in the context of just humanities, like what explains what is happening, contextualize it. But it is tricky because the media does have like a role and a responsibility to cover what is happening, but we are living in probably the most, it took America all of 48 hours to get back to its ways, to politicize the Kirk assassination. It literally was 48 hours. Like at first people were on the edge. Nobody wanted to jump to conclusions, but it was and the right is going to use this to totally put the left in place. The left historically, it's impressive how they could like mobilize. You need like a protest. They're there, 10,000 people, all placards, all chants. You're like, okay, this was pretty coordinated. But I always call it that last leg. When 2004, George Bush had no reason or logic to win again. Iraq was a shit show. He won because the Republicans, sure, they were a bit sloppy early on, but that last 24 hours, they got the evangelicals to come out and vote, going door to door saying, George Bush is a Jesus fanboy, type of thing. So I do think, though, that this gives an opportunity for the right to rewrite history. You know what I mean? Like they are accusing the Democrats of doing exactly what Republicans were doing, calling people fascists. And Trump, everything that they're saying now about the left are literally out of Donald Trump's greatest hits, right? But there is this also like stupidification of America. It's nice that I could say that word, where, it's all very glib. It's all very superficial. And you see politics is all BS. You know what I mean? Like they're literally rewriting history, and very few people are calling them out, and which is weird because even in our comments, the people like these themes that we're covering, but they're like, wow, for WatchMojo to be covering these topics, America's in trouble.
Yeah. And I wanted to ask you a question kind of like building off of this, because I'm really no fan of mainstream media or journalism in the States. I don't like how you have right-wing outlets and left-wing outlets. Like for the life of me, I can't understand why everything has to be so politically charged and catering to like one side or the other. I wish there was more like in the center for like the sane people to like consume. But with the way that things stand now, where do you think WatchMojo's role is going as a media outlet that whose job has historically been to curate information and contextualize, as you said? Like, it feels to me like we're becoming more and more important in a very polarized landscape.
Let's start off by saying we take our job seriously. We shouldn't take ourselves seriously. I also don't want to be like WatchMojo is thinks they're CNN or News Corp. But your question is actually like spot on. So let's actually break that down. There's never been free speech in America. If you go to like the 7 words you can't say on radio or whatever, even the first time, like when Ellen came out, it was like shocking. But at the time I was in my late teens, I was like, okay, like there was lesbians around the world. There's gays. Why is this a big deal? The first interracial couple, I'm sure was, and some of it you could argue is not censorship, like self-policing, for lack of a better word, but media's always been censored. Like, let's just kind of stop pretending that it's not. First of all, the Jews do not run media. But if I went out there, I could explain to you why there's an overrepresentation of Jewish people in media or in finance. You just need to know history. You just need to know anthropology, and then it makes sense. But if somebody went out there and said what they wanted, free speech, and defended it, yeah, they would, by 2 p.m., they would be like, sponsors lost enough. So this concept of like free speech, because it's not free from consequences, has led to a lot of self-policing. So that's one. So nothing's changed. It's a bit more profound and pronounced because of fragmentation, where you can still find, information that before ABC, CBS, and NBC kind of controlled, right? Now, second, yeah, I mean, look, I think it's impossible for the big media companies' voices that are owned by corporations, where whether or not Kimmel is on, whether or not that Maddow gal is on, it doesn't really matter. Like, the reality is, I know Comcast since bought NBC, but you may not remember this, but at one point, General Electric owned NBC. The same General Electric that does light bulbs, appliances, medical systems, and the very same jets, engines that, planes fly around and drop bombs elsewhere. So the mere fact that you have NBC during the GE era, when it was producing, these weapons of mass destructions, being impartial, being neutral, was always a big, it was like ridiculous, because you're like, they're making $87 billion killing all these innocent civilians around the world. But yes, that host is going to be calling out America for its foreign policy. Like, that was also bullshit to anybody that frankly had a brain. Now, what does this mean? Why did the Joe Rogans, these new media franchises, why did these people, why is there an opening for WatchMojo to somewhat objectively make these, tackle these topics? Yeah, because information is available to more people, but also the incumbents are always going to be timid, tepid, shy to bring you the truth, right? So we do have, I would say, an opening. We do have an opportunity, but I also don't think that, but I still think you have to like prove yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's why even if I write something on Twitter, which is unhinged, or on LinkedIn, which is maybe a bit more like, proper, but is like thought provoking, I still bring it to you guys and go, hey, I wrote this. This was some good feedback. What is a WatchMojo angle? And then I'll give you guys like, something that everybody could be more comfortable with. But I absolutely think that for us, we are going to cover these themes more and more, but in our kind of objective, somewhat trying to be impartial and timeless, so that you could go back and, sense the zeitgeist. Like, okay, what was happening when in 2018, the fear was socialism, all these young kids who were like saying capitalism is bad, socialism is the way to go, even though there's never been a successful socialist state. Don't count Scandinavian countries. Those are socially maybe a bit, have aspects of socialism, but economically and in many other ways, they're pretty capitalistic, right? But yeah, no, so I think this is an area we're going to cover more, both on WatchMojo. And I think I was always like, we don't need to revamp context, but these would have been topics we would have covered on context. So I was like, let's just put them on WatchMojo, and the feedback's been really good.
Yeah, it has. Another good question. What's the importance of non-political content for a politically divided audience, and can it still hold value? Very relevant for what we do because we still
Yeah,
cover
I mean,
a
I
variety of
still think
things.
that like our bread and butter is escapism, you know, inform and entertain. And I think again, the second you have a rank and a criteria, you're being subjective. But I think there is always going to be an even greater need for people to leave. This is why, not to talk our book, our like the average time, the watch time somebody sits through our content is really, really long. To me, it speaks to two things: that people after a long day just want to come press play and lean back and just kind of leave their world. But it's also that they actually want to be distracted. You know, that's why we also have to be careful. If we do exactly what CNN or Fox does, then we're diluting what makes WatchMojo. So I think the importance is greater than ever, but it does become, you do get accused of taking a political point of view when even you don't, because everybody around you is doing that, right? But that's fine. And, you know, we were accused sometimes, like early on, people used to accuse us of like a pro Disney bias versus like DC or something. And I was like, these people need help. Like, we're not Disney's mouthpiece. You know what I mean? I was like, people are crazy.
Yeah, I think there's lyrics to a Rush song that go, "If you choose not to decide, you still have made a choice." So, you know, silence.
Well, I mean, I got called out by the pro-Palestine crowd and the Iranians who were critical of the regime early on, when they were like, why are you being so neutral? Why are you trying to both sides it? And I was like, well, what is the main criticism y'all have against media? That they're biased, they take a position. But I also understood that like this wasn't like us looking at DC's, you know, best movies where the stakes are different. I kind of also understood as we wade into these topics, like the future of America is at stake. So you can't both downplay what is happening, but we also don't want to be, we're never in the clickbait business. We're also not going for shock value, but I do like thought-provoking questions, right? Which, by the way, a little plug. So that's like the point of this second leg. Today we'll cover America. We might cover Inside Palestine next week. We might cover Inside Montreal Canadiens. We'll probably do an Inside Expos when the Netflix, another documentary idea I had that somebody else did, which is all good. You know, so the idea is just taking a topic and going a bit deeper without necessarily boring audiences to death with like 20 episodes. But we may also do like take a piece of this show and go deeper, invite a guest and be like, is this right? Is this wrong? What do you think?
For sure. So you and I are both Canadian. You were born in Iran. What do you think Americans think when people like us get on a platform and start talking about the States as if, you know?
Well, first of all, let's start with a light answer and then I'll go a bit heavy. So the reason I feel why, not just musicians, let's put musicians aside, but why are so many successful comedians Canadian in America? Not just because Canadians have a sense of humor, Americans have a sense of humor, but it's, I find actually being like a neighbor. So I'm not talking about like somebody who lives in Indonesia, they may not get it, but I think Canadians in particular, we are close enough to America, but distant enough to be a bit more objective, for one. And Canada is just like a less extreme version of America, right? I mean, America, like economically, is more capitalist and laissez-faire. We are a bit more in the Scandinavian model of like capitalism, but with some like safeguards, for one. But so one is, I think, outsiders usually do have a better take on things because they're objective. They're not like, I'm a Democrat all my life or I'm a Republican, so I'm going to react this way. Like if Charlie Kirk was a left-wing guy, shot by whomever, we don't need to get into it right now, like would people would have had the same stance, or did they adjust their reaction based on the target? And most people are hypocrites. We know the answer. You know, like the Republicans would not have shed a tear if Joe Rogan, God forbid, got shot. You know, I'm not saying
I feel like we would have seen exactly the same response just from the opposite group of people.
They're all full of shit. Exactly. So, but so for me now, let's get serious. So I was born in Iran. So no country, I mean, there's a few, but on equal standing, knows better or has been a bitter, I'm being sarcastic, beneficiary, read victim, of when America wants to export democracy. You know, ironically, because Iran was a democracy for all intents and purposes, it was a secular state. And whereas Jimmy Carter, even Republicans would view him as like a nice peanut farmer. He was like, whatever, he wasn't a great president, but he wasn't a bad guy. Iranians put Jimmy Carter on the same level as like Satan, because he's the one that basically pulled support for the Shah, and he was like, you know, the Shah, he was like, whatever, he wasn't a great president, but he was a bad guy. Iranians put Jimmy Carter on the same level as like Satan, because he's the one that basically pulled support for the Shah, and he was like, whatever, he wasn't a great president, but he was a bad guy. Iranians put Jimmy Carter on the same level as like Satan, and pave the way for Khomeini to come on Air France and take over the country, which then led to a domino effect that explains the shit show that is the Middle East. So we've seen in Iran what happens when, for lack of a better word, Marxists, socialists, lefties pool their energy and resources with, in Iran, it was clerics. It was the clerical class that was always there. You know, Iran was a religious country, not as religious as like the Arabic countries, but there's some nuances about what makes Iran different, but it was never that religious, you know, of a nation. So somehow less than 5% of the population that represent the cleric, you know, the mullahs, so to speak, how did that minority take over a country then of 40 million, today of 90 million, and stays in power when less than 20%? It's you, bitch, to quote Wanda Sykes. It's America. It's America's invisible hand, not so invisible, that does this, right? So a lot of Iranians now, even though many of them do support Trump, depending on their views, they are ringing that alarm bell to say, hey, when you see Texas being run over by mosques, when you see the mayor of Dearborn saying, hey, you're not welcome here, that's basically what happened in Iran. So I would almost say that Americans should pay attention. It's very easy to discard The Guardian and say they have 400 days to save the democracy. What do these damn Brits know? But I would say America should probably listen to all voices that are, you know, highlighting why it's going off the rails. But I'm also quite American in upbringing and education, right? I mean, I know more about American history than Canadian history, if we're going to be fair.
Yeah, and you've done a lot of business, you know, with Americans.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, it's like there's a whole, we should do comparing Canadian and American ways of doing business, because people think it's the same, but it's not at all the same. But anyway.
What about the ways, like what's going on with at the borders now? People are being deported. There's a lot of controversy about that. Do you think that that's a bigger threat to freedom in America than this whole censorship thing?
I don't want to sound fascist myself. I do have a problem when foreigners go to any country, UK, France, or America, and then they're like, you know, you suck, instead of thank you for giving me a second opportunity, and then they attack the country. I'm not a fan of Ilhan Omar. I'm not a fan of the other gentleman that recently got deported. I don't think that's really what like freedom of speech and like good faith criticism of an institution is. So I'm not saying to deport an American citizen who was either born here or naturalized. Like, you do need to respect the law. But yeah, when I see a student who is given this opportunity, this privilege, not this right, to come to Canada or the US, and they go out there and sure, exercise their right to protest, but are effectively vandalizing and just, you know, causing mayhem. Yeah, I don't necessarily think that that person has this God-given right to stay in the country. I have no problem if a country goes, yeah, we don't want this garbage in our society. So that, if you call that fascism, I don't really think. Like, let me take you to Iran, or let me take you to a few countries around the world, and we'll see what you think. But I also don't, it's not one size fits all. I don't think Trump should deport, you know, certain people just because he doesn't like what they say. I mean, that I think is clearly not what I'm endorsing here.
Speaking of fascism, this touches upon an upcoming project that we're working on, where we're asking the question, is America entering its fascist era? Do you have any thoughts on that? The video is not complete. It's not out yet, but do you have a little bit of
I've alluded to the whole, like when I did Fox in the Hen House, I was looking at socialism. So if you would have told me then, hey, in 5 years, you're going to do a Q&A with your colleague discussing fascism. Okay, maybe I would have said not impossible, because all extremes connect. So like extreme communism and extreme fascism are actually a circle. They're not a spectrum. But I think the worry is not when there is a healthy balance and regression to the mean, which usually is a very small moment in time, because then it goes to the other extremes. I am a bit worried about the extreme it will take, right? I mean, all you need is one retaliation, you know, some guy that then shoots, I won't even name names, don't want to give any, like some guy that shoots somebody to avenge Charlie Kirk, then the escalation. Or the next time you see like some protester blocking a road, you've seen the fatigue. When somebody like in Europe is like, my wife's pregnant, I got to get to the hospital, they'll roll over that protester. Not condoning it. That's to be very clear. But I do think that, like, World War I started, people always say, with Princip got shot there. But I mean, there was a number of factors that were brewing. And so America is at a boiling point. You saw what happened when George Floyd died. There was riots and everywhere. Haven't seen the equivalent when Charlie Kirk died. But it just takes one other bad event for people to go, it's showtime. And what is a bit... the tinder, like the fire, the spark could become a colossal fire that would make a pyromaniac envious, is that you do have in Donald Trump somebody who has no scruples to send in the military, crack down. So then a protest could become a riot, could engulf and become a civil war. Unlikely. But so I'm actually worried more about just the extreme. Like, how much is the right going to use this, weaponize this? How much are they going to, you cancel? I mean, it's Fallon. I mean, Fallon is like the no political, everything is like a 5-year-old humor joke level. You're gonna cancel Fallon? Like, Fallon is too risque. You know what I mean? Like, at some point, is SNL gonna, so like that's almost lighthearted. But if at some point it spirals into violence and stuff, then yeah, it's, I mean, the stats. There's more guns in America than people, albeit not everybody has a gun. If a brother's got a weapon, he's probably got a collection of 12 guns,
Yeah. So what do you think happens next? Are things going to keep moving farther towards the right in the US? And if so, how far do you think it'll go before it ultimately comes back around?
So the reason why it's going to get much, much worse, I'm actually long-term always optimistic. Like, I'm an optimistic guy, glasses always half full. I don't think America is going to end. Yes, I wrote that article. I came up with the American Empire as a question. And I do think China is going to take over in many, many ways. But I don't think America. I think very much, though, the takeaway is, another video we're doing. It's top 10 one-time great empires that are shit show countries now.
Yeah.
Maybe the working title changes. Ancient Persia, Iran, shit show today. Ancient Rome, Italy, love it, kind of a shit show. It's better now, but a few years ago, you were like, this is a dysfunctional country. The French, totally shit show. The British Empire, uber shit show, right? So why is it that, and I'll tell you why. People, to build empires, it's the sins and virtues. Again, greed, pride, envy, gluttony, lust, right? You give in to these bad feelings where you think you're better, you think you have a God-given right. So you build, expand, and what happens is eventually you piss off enough people where there's like payback. Alexander the Great destroyed Persepolis because he goes, you burnt Athens, yada yada. So my guess is America will continue to be obviously a very strong entity, but it will, whether it's decades or century, I think it's years, frankly, it will start to resemble like the UK after World War II. It will start to resemble, let's say, France in the 1800s and not France whenever it was at its peak power, right? And the reason for that is the people grow sloth. They become lazy. I mean, obesity, people point to that. It's not normal for a country to be this out of shape, especially a country with so many natural wonders. And, and it's just it's the culture. Everything is built for cars and the food sucks. I was in Europe. You eat a lot, but you come back, you lose weight. You go to the States, you want to kill yourself after 5 days because everything is deep fried and whatnot, right? Mm-hmm. So I think what's going to happen, though, is in the near term, the Republicans are going to go ballistic. They're going to go parabolic. They're going to silence everybody. They're going to intimidate everybody. It'll be like a new era of McCarthyism. After 10/7, it was, do you support Hamas? Like this gotcha question when I was like, well, that's a nuanced question, and they did bad things, but learn the history. Yeah. And that was like a risque topic. So now it's like, do you support Charlie Kirk or do you support him getting killed? And it's like, so America is going to go far more to the extreme. And frankly, I'll land on this. The problem is the Democrats are totally lost. They're clueless. They're digging deeper and deeper, taking the bait and just positioning themselves as the out-of-touch party. I grew up more as a Democrat all my life. I mean, I don't vote in the States, but I was more idealistically aligned with Democrats. And as I got older, I was like, okay, economically, maybe I'm more Republican, but socially, in terms of freedoms and liberties and respect for it, I was like, live and let live. But it is hard now to come out, I think, in America, not for the people that are always going to be on the left, but that middle that ultimately decides who sits in the White House. I understand why none of those people comfortably would say, yeah, I'm going to vote Democrat, because then you're condoning the destruction of property, the killing of people. So I think it's going to get really, really bad in that sense, like the witch hunt. But I think America will just kind of land in some kind of like UK post World War II vibe, where pretty dominant, but not the only kid in town, with the rise of China and whatnot.
Cool. Well, we're gonna have to see how things play out. I'm sure it's not gonna be the last time that we address American politics in this new series, Ash. But thank you for your time and your insights today. It's always great to speak with you. Thank you for everybody who left comments. Love engaging with you guys and answering your questions. There were some great ones. And stay tuned, because we'll be back with more Inside X, no, Inside TV.
And we have a bunch of topics on a wide range of spectrum. I don't know if you want to post some of them, but you're also welcome to leave suggestions for what topic you'd like us to cover.
Yeah, please do.
Thank you. Have a great
All right.
day.
Until next time, take care, everybody. See ya.